From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So Kiersten White is the giver of the world's most awkward hugs. She's a New York Times best-selling author of books such as I Darken, the Paranormalcy series, Paranormalcy, Supernaturally and Endlessly, the book Mind Games, Perfect Lies, Annie and Fia, The Chaos of Stars, Illusions of Fate. She writes thrillers from a young adult point of view about princesses, extraordinary girls with extraordinary powers, girls that find their strength and bravery to confront weird challenges such as fairies and werewolves and vampires and other bits of supernatural stuff. I just finished reading Paranormalcy, and I have 2 teenage daughters, and I could totally see Evie in them. Kiersten really gets the tone she gets their tone. So I imagine my daughters having Evie's flippant attitude around really scary characters and pulling out Tazy and doing damage. So please welcome Kiersten White.
Well, thank you for reading Paranormalcy. You are actually my exact target audience. I've been surprised at how many teen girls read the books, but that's all right. Thank you so much for coming. I am aware that Raina Telgemeier is speaking at the same time, so I appreciate you being here. I would probably go watch her too. So thank you. All right, so I'm Kiersten White. It's always really interesting hearing yourself introduced by someone else. How do I get the PowerPoint started? It's really bright up here, you guys. Just, which one? Okay, I'm so excited to be here with you today. This is my first National Book Festival, so I feel like it's a really big honor and privilege to be here. My most recent book is I Darken. It's epic historical fiction about a gender-swapped Vlad the Impaler. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I decided to write historical fiction, and more specifically, why I decided to write an anti-heroine. But as I was planning this, usually when you do events or festivals, you're on a panel with several other authors, and people ask you questions and you answer. So when I found out that I just had 30 minutes on a stage by myself here, this was my original topic. And my publicist was like, oh, I need your PowerPoint right now. And I'm like, I don't know. So, once I got past deciding to write a PowerPoint about PowerPoints, I thought about trying to guess what audiences will find interesting. It depends. It varies from audience to audience. I thought about writing about historical fiction. If any of you are aspiring writers, I have a huge writing tip for you. Don't write historical fiction. You guys, it's so hard. One time, I did 5 hours of research on traditional Arabic erotic poetry conventions. Did I lose the mic, or is it just less echoey? Okay, good. And those 5 hours of research informed 2 lines in the book. And I guarantee you, people are going to read those and be like, she's a really bad poet. Yeah. The existential crisis of writing, period. Writing is super fun, and I'm really privileged to be able to do it professionally, but sometimes we feel like Leo over there, although he has better hair. But I finally settled on talking about the peculiar morality of villains. Is my actual topic. And it's something that I struggled with deciding to write an anti-heroine who is essentially a villain. And it became a little bit more of a struggle as I saw the UK, when they were promoting the book, kept talking about how Lada's a new feminist icon. And I was like, you do realize she's an anti-heroine. But that's all right. Girls are allowed to be bad too. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Vlad the Impaler. Generally in an audience, I can pick out exactly who is going to know who Vlad the Impaler was. You guys are really obvious, yes. I once had a guy at Comic-Con come up, and I will say, do you know who Vlad the Impaler is? And most people would be like, no. And this guy had a handmade chainmail bracelet, like dragon cross earrings, and I looked at him and I said, I'm not even going to ask if you know who Vlad the Impaler was. And he's like, oh yeah, I do. So Vlad the Impaler was an obscure Romanian prince in the 1400s, and his last name was actually Dracul, which, if that's familiar, it's because Bram Stoker used him as the inspiration for Dracula. He was that notoriously not nice. Vlad grew up as a political prisoner in the Ottoman courts at the same time as Mehmed the Conqueror, who was the Ottoman Sultan who at the age of 21 would go on to overthrow Constantinople, which was something that his people had been trying to do for centuries and had never been able to, but he was so brilliant and driven that he was the one who did it. And Vlad and his brother Radu, who had the much kinder historical nomenclature of Radu the Handsome, right? Sometimes I wonder what I want to be known as. I think it'll be Kiersten the Napper. So Vlad and Radu grew up, and it was not an easy way to grow up. They were educated, they were expected to become part of the Ottoman Empire, but they experienced a lot of cruelty. It's history. People weren't nice. When they grew up, the Ottomans actually put Vlad on the throne of Romania as their prince, but it was sort of a puppet prince thing, was the understanding of you're going to serve our interests. Whereas Radu stayed with the Ottomans, and he stayed loyal. He converted to Islam, and he never went back on that for the rest of his life. But Vlad was not a fan of the Ottomans, and he was deeply, deeply nationalistic. So he went on to antagonize them in every way that he could. There's one letter from him. So the other European allies asked him, don't make the Ottomans mad. Let's just keep things at a base level. Let's keep things friendly. Because he didn't want to make Mehmed the Conqueror mad, because he was Mehmed the Conqueror. And Vlad once wrote a letter saying, I went into Bulgaria and I slaughtered tens of thousands of people, and we killed them in their homes and we killed them in their streets. And so, yes, I think I might have broken the treaty. A little bit, just a little bit, he broke it. And so what he did was, he was so determined to have his own country that he was going to do whatever it took to keep it. And the thing you got to remember, though, is at the time, the Ottomans were kind of the guys you wanted to be, because they had religious tolerance. They didn't care whether or not you were Muslim. Actually, they preferred you didn't convert, because they could tax you at a higher rate if you were a Christian. But they wouldn't kill you for not converting. They didn't believe in feudalism, so everyone had opportunities for advancement. When Mehmed overthrew Constantinople, he opened the city up. He invited Jewish refugees from Spain, from the Inquisition, and he really wanted to have this sort of European jewel. He wanted the brightest minds, he wanted the best people, and he didn't care where they came from. So they were actually really good people to have over your country. They asked for taxes and they asked for boys for their army, but that was about it. But Vlad refused. He refused to do that. And so what he did was, when he knew the Ottomans were coming, he engaged in all-out scorched earth warfare. He diverted rivers to make his own land into marshes. He burned his crops. He poisoned his wells. He found anybody who was sick among his people, and he sent them into the Ottoman camps to circulate and to try and get them sick. So he had germ warfare. And he did all of these things. He even used his own intimate knowledge of their practices to dress in their uniforms and sneak into their camp at night and launch a night attack, which actually might have worked had his own people supported him, but they didn't. So finally, Mehmed and his army get through this just nightmare that Vlad has created for them, and they get to the capital city, and lining the road to the capital that has its gates open are 10 or 20,000 impaled Turkish soldiers. So it was quite the greeting. And at this point, the Turkish army said, we don't know what to do with this. So they turned around and they left. He actually won, except he had made so many people angry and had damaged so much of his own land that his own people no longer supported him. So you're probably thinking, here's a nice German woodcut of him eating in the middle of a forest of impaled bodies. This is a portrait of him, so I know you guys are looking at him, you're knowing all that history, and you're saying, teenage girl, right? Maybe not. But I knew all this history, and I thought it was really interesting. I had actually traveled to Romania in 2010, and my husband and I visited almost all of his historical sites, just kind of as an aside, because we were going to Romania anyway. And as my husband was telling my mom about all of this history, I was thinking about it and thinking, how does somebody get to that point? How does someone get to the point where they can justify committing atrocities in the name of their own goal? How does that happen? Because it has to be gradual. And then I thought, but what if he had been a girl? And, for most authors, that's how books start, is that whole, but what if? And for me, him being a girl just made so much more sense. Because as a girl, you have to work harder, you have to be smarter, you have to be better at everything to attain just the same base level as other people get for being boys. And so once I turned Vlad into Lada, suddenly that ruthlessness and that willingness to do anything to meet her goals made a lot of sense to me as a storyteller. So some of the things that I wanted to explore, guys, I was just so unambitious with this book. I wanted to explore gender. I wanted to explore politics, queer identity, faith, all of those things that I loved writing in history because you can kind of detach them from our modern sensibilities. You don't have to address them in context of our culture and what's going on today, and you can really explore them as the concepts that they are rather than our particular culture. One thing that I really tried hard in this book was to capture faith. One of the characters converts to Islam, and it's a very healing and very powerful thing in his life. And that was really important to me as a person of faith, to try and capture that in a YA book. But mostly I wanted to ask that central question. And that central question is how? How do people, normal people, get to the point where they can allow and commit atrocities and do these terrible things? You guys, this is such a cheerful topic. You can imagine how pleasant I am when I'm writing these books. I'm sitting there in Starbucks and everybody around me. Yeah, you guys, it's historical fiction. And I really don't think that these anti-heroine stories are about the shock factor. For me, it's not about the darkness or the violence or anything. It's really looking at how, because we experience history as a story, it's already been packaged for us. And most of the time it's been packaged for us by the people who wrote it. So for example, when I was researching Mehmet the Conqueror, all of the European accounts of him were like, he was drunk all the time, and he was this terrible person, and he committed all these atrocities, and da-da-da. I'm going, if that guy was drunk all the time, I don't think he would have been able to overthrow an entire city at the age of 21. He was actually brilliant, but when you read about him from his enemies, you get a very different picture than when you read about him from the people who loved him and who knew him. And so what I tried to do is I tried to read both extremes and then find a middle path. It's a little bit like, Fox News versus, you got to find that middle path. And so trying to find that and trying to find the real people among the history was the challenge, because so often we look at these things and we say, yes, that was bad. We can agree that it was bad. The end result was bad. But when we only focus on the end result, we fail to see how it happened. And you look at Vlad the Impaler, and he was so deeply, deeply nationalistic, it was his country or nothing, that he actually ended up destroying his own land, killing a lot of his own people, and in the end losing the throne to a foreign power anyway. And so that to me is the value of the anti-hero story, of tracing these paths, is not to look at the darkness, but to look at how you get there, and to really explore that so that we don't forget that these things happen in cycles, and they happen over and over again. And so that value and that strength of knowing those stories can help us realize, in our own lives as a nation, as a world, like, where are we getting to the point where we've tipped over? So really light, fun, happy writing, you guys. So I feel like there's value in the telling beyond entertainment, because the stories that we tell and the stories that we love become part of us. And if we tell the important stories, whether they're happening now or whether they're happening in the 1400s in the Ottoman Empire, reliving those stories and revisiting them will help us to create our own lives in the ways that we want them to be. Yeah, so no pressure. Just like no pressure when you're speaking at the National Book Festival, right? So, I talk really fast, and that is the end of my presentation. I am open to questions. You can ask me about writing, you can ask me about history, you can ask me about math, but I guarantee you you're in the wrong audience for that one. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask?
Hi, thanks. I'll go first. I was curious if you could talk about your writing process, because I find one of the successes with all your books is that you do everything right.
Well, thank you.
The prose is magical,
Thank
the
you.
plot, the characterization, and the details thread throughout it. So
I'm not actually related to her, you guys.
Your first draft, I know, into the end result. What comes easy to you of all those elements of writing, and then what do you add further on in your later drafts?
I think everybody has their strengths and weaknesses in writing. I'm a fairly strong drafter, so by the time I actually sit down to draft, I write very complete, very clean drafts. But one of my strengths in writing is dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I think it's really fun. I would write entire books of dialogue if I could, but then my editors are like, where are they? I'm like, I don't know, they're in a room. They're like, what does the room look like? I don't know, they're just talking. And so for me, a lot of that detail work is what I have to go back in and really fill in and work on. Like, what are they wearing? Where are they? What does it look like? Another hint, if you don't like description, if you don't like describing landscapes or rooms or clothes or food, don't write historical fiction, you guys. It's so much work. Um, so this one was really definitely a challenge to me in that I did not play to my strengths, and so I really had to buckle down and figure out, like, how do I incorporate that sense of place? Because it's historical fiction, and so you need to feel grounded. Because I can't just say, you know, they were in a small town in Virginia, and, you know, we all have a general sense of what that feels like. But I can't say they were in the small town of Corte de Argos. You guys don't know where that is, and you don't know what that feels like. And so I really had to kind of dig in deeper and do the detail work on this one. So really, every book just has different challenges. Some of them are harder to piece together the timeline. Some of them I have to work more on detail work. So my process, generally, I start with a question. I was actually talking last night with some authors about what you start with, and some of them start with a character, and some of them start with an idea. And generally, for me, I start with a question. It's what I want to explore with the book. For me, the plot comes in relation to that question. So, you know, Paranormalcy, I wanted to see, can I write a funny paranormal romance? Because that was back in the day of Twilight when no one noticed that if your vampire boyfriend sparkles in the sun, that's hilarious. Like, you guys, that's really funny. I'd hang him in my rearview mirror. So, and, you know, and the questions vary. And I Darken, it was how do good people get to the point where they can justify atrocities? That was super fun. I have a middle grade book coming out next year where my question was, can I write a 10-page long pee joke? And the answer is yes. So, yeah, I have to have that drive, because if I don't have that question that I'm trying to answer as a writer, then I lose interest in the book. And I have a lot of like 50, 60, 70-page starts that I never go anywhere with because that central question wasn't there for me. So writing process is a hard thing to talk about because it's different for everyone, but for me, I just have to have that soul, that core of the book that I'm engaged in and I'm exploring, and I think everything else comes after that. Does anyone else have a question that I can vaguely not answer? Yes. Oh, hi. This is John Scott-Ron, young adult and adult author, most recently Hope and Red, which is a fantastic fantasy.
Thanks, Kiersten.
You're welcome.
I actually have a historical fiction question for you. How do you balance the needs of the story with the actual historical events and details?
That's a good question, and it's even more difficult in YA because YA, the emphasis is on movement. You know, I feel like adult writing, you can get a little bit more self-indulgent, really sink down into the description. But YA, you know, we're known for the stories move quickly, and they're very, like, there's a lot of action and engagement. So it was a really big problem with book 2 because I did all this research, you guys, so much research, just thousands of pages of research, so much, on the fall of Constantinople. And so I knew all of these details and these amazing anecdotes and these actual historical figures, and I wanted to include all of them because I had put in the time to learn about all of them, and gosh darn it, I wanted them on the page. But my editor, who is very wise, pointed out, like, these two men serve the exact same function. And I'm like, well, but they were actual historical figures. They were both there. But as far as the narrative was concerned, they really only filled one role, so there only needed to be one of them. I actually had notes that said, get rid of Lucas. And I have a nephew named Lucas. And my mom saw that paper, and she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, not him, not him. He's cute. We can keep him. So I feel like you have to give them just enough to have a sense of the history and a sense of the place, and to feel like they're learning things, but not so much that it reads like a history text. So the greatest thing that I hear after people read the book is, then I went on a Wikipedia rabbit hole researching what actually happened with all of these characters. Because you do want to have as much truth to the history as you can, but in the end you're telling a story. And history is messy, and it doesn't have those nice through lines with the story. So like in book 2, I also have the Hungarian Court, and I actually have a note in the back where I apologize to Hungary as a country entirely because what I did to their history. I'm so sorry, Hungary. But because I couldn't get into it because it was too big and too complicated. So for historical fiction, I think trying to get a feel for it and a sense for it without getting so bogged down in the actual history that it reads like a textbook. It's hard. Again, don't write historical fiction. It's so hard, you guys. It's so hard. Okay, do you have any other questions?
Since you found it so hard to write a historical fiction about Vlad the Impaler, did you ever think of changing it to strictly fiction and keep him gender bent and do Vlad the Impaler as a vampire? Because it would be easier.
It would have been easier. No, because the interest for me with this project was the actual history, because I think that you can't get better stories than history already offers you. More dynamic or incredible people doing astonishing things. So I really did definitely want to include the actual history, and it was important to me not to, my only promises with this book are no vampires. Because that's all people know of the history, and Romania has a special place in my heart, and I really wanted to kind of introduce that to a lot of people who wouldn't have any idea about it. Although I do get, Romanians who are super excited, and then Romanians who are like, this is not our history. He was a boy. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. I just really wanted him to be a girl. I don't know that I would do straight historical fiction again. I'd probably do historical influenced fantasy, so that instead of doing 5 hours of research to find out whether a house in the Moldovan countryside would have windows that opened, no one has written about that, you guys. No graduate students have ever written a research paper on windows in the 15th century in the countryside of Moldova. Although you'd be amazed what graduate students have done papers on. Thank you, graduate students of the world who post your papers online. Instead of having to do 5 hours of research and then end up just writing the window out of the scene, you could say, it opens because of magic, right? You can't do that in historical fiction. So, although one of the reasons why I gender swapped Vlad the Impaler was so that if people were like, that's not how things happen, I'm like, well, he wasn't a girl, so we already changed history, so that's how it happens now. So, yeah. Oh, yes.
I was wondering, since you mentioned some of the hardships and difficulties you encountered when writing, what were some of the things that you did to keep motivated during your writing process?
I sold the book before it was finished. So I was contractually obligated. No, but I understand, like, writing is hard, and you have an idea that you love, and you get started on it, and you're so fired up about it, and then you get to the middle, and you're like, oh, I actually have to fix all of the problems that I set up, and it's a lot easier to just jump over to something new. One thing that I try to do is I try to set really regular drafting schedule for myself. Like right now I have a calendar for the next 3 months, and I have listed the amount that I have to write every single day. And I find that motivation really helps me. Another thing that I do is at the end of the day, when I'm done with my writing, I take just a few minutes and I write just a few sentences on the next page about what happens next. So the next time I sit down to write, I'm not staring at a blank page, that infinite whiteness that I have to fill up. It already has words there that tell me, like, Kiersten, this is what you're doing today. So that for me really helped. And also, it was a story that was important to me, and it was one that I really wanted to tell. So even though it was hard, guys, I just started writing book 3. Oh my gosh. Even though it was hard, like, it was important to me, and it was important to me to tell it well. So I really wanted that challenge and wanted to stretch as a writer so that I could create the best version of this story that I could. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Yes.
Oh, I'm so short.
That's all right. You're in good company.
I have 2 questions. My first question is, from the variety of languages taught towards Lada, Radu, Bogdan, and Mehmet, are you possibly fluent in one of the languages spoken within the book?
Oh, I wish. I actually only speak English and a little bit of Spanish, but my husband, you guys, I married so well. He is, besides being really good looking, he is fluent in Romanian and Arabic, and he's currently learning Greek because being trilingual is boring, right? So the only thing he doesn't speak is Turkish, and I was really annoyed with him for that. He should have learned Turkish
I actually
to benefit me.
know Turkish.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do.
Well, I could have used you. Yeah, but it was, and one thing that I chose to do in this book is, a lot of times in books you'll see words in foreign languages italicized, but because this is taking place in an area of the world and a time of the world where they had to know several languages in order to survive, and everything would have been familiar, I chose not to italicize anything, because I didn't want to make any other languages look like another language, so. Yeah.
My second question was, which character would you say you could have most related to, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. So people have asked if I'm a lot like Lada, and I'm like, are you afraid of me if you think that I am? She's not really nice, you guys. She's quite violent. But actually the character that I personally relate to the most is Radu. He's more sensitive, he's very emotional, he is deeply committed to the people that he loves, and he's a little bit sly and sneaky and cunning. And somebody was like, oh, Radu's such a Hufflepuff. I'm like, oh, sweetheart, Radu is a Slytherin. 100%. And so yeah, I think he's the character that I actually relate to the most, and the things that he goes to, particularly his conversion and his relationship to faith, was very personal for me to write. So.
Hi. What happened in Hungary that you needed to apologize for?
So every country has their own amazing, intricate history. And there was a Hungarian leader named John Hunyadi, who was this amazing military leader who was also a contemporary of Mehmed and Vlad the Impaler. And he actually at one point took Vlad in and trained him and was sort of an ally to him. And there's all sorts of drama that went on at the time period. Hunyadi's son, Matthias, who actually had no claim to the throne, ended up working his way in to be king of Hungary, and then he had to wait and get money to try and buy back his crown from Poland, because Poland likes to take other people's crowns and not give them back. And so it was all these things that happened over the course of a couple decades, but for the purpose of my narrative, I just needed John and Matthias to get their act together and to get that throne a lot faster, and to need Lada to do it. So I basically just skimmed through decades of history and ignored most of it. So I'm sorry, Hungary. You really do have fantastic history. All right, we have 5 minutes left. Do you know how many questions I can answer in 5 minutes? So many. Just kidding. Yes. I know, we're all so short in here. I love it.
Yes. You've talked a little bit about having to take things out of the narrative that you really like to include. Is there something in this book that you really wish that you could have left in, or is there something in your previous books that you really wished you could have left in?
That's a good question. I think I end up feeling like if I have to take something out, there's a reason to take it out. So people will ask, like, are there deleted scenes? And I'm going, yeah, but if they're deleted, there's a reason for that. My best example of that was actually Paranormalcy, which is my first book. And I ended up cutting about 40 pages before I sent it out to editors. And one of the scenes was this day when Evie goes to high school, and it just, like, it was adorable, and she got to go to high school, and she got to make all of these jokes relating it to, like, teen dramas on TV, and, you know, and it just kind of went on and on and on, because I was having fun writing it, and I was having fun giving her all those experiences. But what it did was it dragged the plot to a standstill, and it sucked all of the narrative tension out of the book. And so my friend and critique partner, Stephanie Perkins, who is brilliant, said, this doesn't need to be here. And at first I was like, no, but I love it so much. And then I realized, like, okay, it doesn't need to be here. And those things that I love so much about it, like that really good joke or this fun scene, I could actually pull out and put in other places. So out of the 15 pages, there were really only a few paragraphs that I loved so much, and I used them somewhere else. So for me, the editorial process is just as important as the drafting, because the drafting gets the story on the paper. I would say, like, stories are made in a first draft, books are made in editing. So I never get too attached. Oftentimes I even forget what I cut because it's not essential to the story.
That's right.
Yeah. And editors are great. Editors are so smart, you guys. Editors are the best, because they can look at what you made and say, this is so good. Oh, I love this so much. Here's 10 pages on what you need to fix. And you're like, oh, okay. But then they're right on everything. So, yeah. I've had people ask if I would ever self-publish, because I have several manuscripts that I've written completely and that didn't, for whatever reason, get published. And I would say no, because I don't want to put out anything that's not my absolute best, and I feel like editors make my stuff my absolute best, so it's important to me to go through that. Do you have any other questions?
How did you get, like, Radu and Lada? Like, the book starts when they're, like, smaller and, like, grow up. How did you make that so real? Because for me, it was, like, very well written.
Oh, thank you so much. I really wanted to start from, it starts when they're born. And I wanted to start that way so that you could really see everything that went into informing who they are. I really like writing sibling dynamics. I actually have 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And then I always end up writing really antagonistic, unhealthy sibling relationships. And they all still like me, so I guess I'm okay. Although when they were reading one of my books, all of my sisters, not knowing the other ones had done it, texted me and said, I'm kind of scared of you now. And I was like, you knew me in high school. You should have been scared of me a long time ago. But yeah, I really, really love writing sibling dynamics, because I think that, these are people that we don't choose, but that we're connected to for our entire lives. And that's such an interesting and fraught and rewarding relationship, so I really like writing those.
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions.
Okay.
My first is, and you must get this a lot, not every aspiring writer is going to get their first book and it's going to be really good. What would you suggest, like any tips, if you want to become a writer but you're not sure?
Yeah, well, my first book that came out was not my first book. It was my fourth book. So that right there, it takes a while. So my advice, if you want to be a writer, is to read really widely, read what's popular, read classics, and look at it while you're reading it. Really pay attention. Like, if you can't put it down, what is the author doing that is engaging your interest so much? And if you get bored and you're losing interest, what has the author done that has let you say, nah, I don't really want to keep reading this anymore, because reading is really the best education in writing that you can get. And then as far as trying to get published, it really is just a matter of doing the work, of sitting down, finishing a draft, editing it, getting it as best as you can, and then setting it out there and starting to write the next thing. I actually started writing Paranormalcy when another book of mine was on submission to editors, and nobody bought that. That's not a really fun way to do it, by the way. I really recommend selling a book instead of not selling a book. It's way more fun. But in the meantime, I had been writing Paranormalcy, so when it was very clear that that first book wasn't going to sell, I had something else. And I had something else to give my agent and to go out with. And, I didn't get an agent right off the bat either. It took 50 letters, query letters. You write to an agent and you say, hey, I wrote this book, do you want to read it? And they write back and say no. Or they don't write back at all. So it took me 50 of those to get an agent, and then it took me my fourth book to get published. So I say just keep at it. That's really the best thing you can do, is keep writing. And we're actually out of time, but keep writing, okay? It's worth it. And everything you write, you learn from. There's no writing that's wasted. So, all right, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for choosing me over Raina. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.